They found the map at 3:17 p.m., not 3:15, not 3:20, 3:17 exactly. The same time Frank Lucas walked out of that Lenox Avenue shooting in 1971 with 3 bullets in his coat and not a drop of blood on his skin. Newark, New Jersey, May 30th, 2019. A law office that smells like old coffee and older secrets. The king of Harlem is 6 feet under, but his final move is just beginning. The lawyer's hands shake as he opens the sealed envelope. Inside the will, tucked between property deeds and bank statements, is a piece of paper that doesn't belong. Hand-drawn. Crude. Sketched on the back of a diner napkin with blue ink, 3 landmarks, 2 measurements, 1X, and 4 numbers scrawled in the corner, 27, 14, 10, 50. 27 feet deep. 14 paces north. 10 seconds to decide. $50 million. The room splits in half right there. Blood versus paper. Family versus street. Loyalty versus money. Because Frank Lucas didn't trust banks. Banks had cameras. Banks had records. Banks had federal judges with subpoena power. Frank trusted dirt. Cold New Jersey soil that never testified. Mud that never wore a wire. Ground that kept secrets better than any vault the government could crack. You heard the stories. Everybody did. The man who flooded Harlem with 99% pure heroin. The man who built a $250 million empire by going straight to the source. The man who sat ringside at Madison Square Garden while the mafia watched from the cheap seats. But here's what they never told you. Frank Lucas was never broke. When the DIA kicked down his door in 1975, they found $584,000 hidden in his ceiling. The media called it his life savings. They were wrong. That was walking around money. Lunch money for a man who was moving $1 million a day. The real money? The insurance policy? The God fund that no judge, no DIA agent, and no snitch could ever touch? That was buried, somewhere in the forgotten corners of New Jersey, wrapped in waterproof steel drums, sits the last treasure of the American gangster. Untouched. Waiting. Growing interest in the only bank that never closes. The Bank of the Earth. But here's the problem with digging up a dead king's fortune. You're not the only one who heard the story. The map isn't complete. It's a riddle wrapped in paranoia, designed to separate the loyal from the greedy, the smart from the desperate. Because in Frank Lucas's world, nothing was ever free. Every dollar had a body count. Every secret had a price. Because this isn't just a treasure hunt, it's a test. And by the end of this story, you'll know exactly where to dig and why you should never, ever go looking. Harlem, 1968. The apartment on Lenox Avenue smells like death wearing expensive cologne. Outside, the city burns with riots and revolution, sirens wailing through streets where anger has found its voice. But inside apartment 4B, the world has slowed to the rhythm of a dying man's breath. Cigar smoke hangs thick as fog over a graveyard, Cuban tobacco mixing with the sulfur scent of matches struck too many times. The curtains stay drawn even at 3 in the afternoon. Bumpy Johnson doesn't want sunlight anymore. Sunlight is for men with futures. Bumpy sits in his leather throne, the same chair where he ordered hits and negotiated territories and built an empire that made the Italians nervous. 40 years he's survived Alcatraz, survived the Genovese family, survived the streets that eat legends for breakfast. But empires don't stop bullets, and they sure as hell don't stop cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months. That was 4 months ago. Now the Lion of Harlem is working on borrowed time, and Bumpy Johnson never liked being in debt to anyone, not even God. Across from him sits Frank Lucas, 38 years old, lean, hungry, dressed in a suit that cost less than the ashtray on Bumpy's table. Frank's hands rest on his knees like a soldier awaiting orders. He doesn't slouch. He doesn't fidget. He doesn't speak unless spoken to. He's been running numbers, collecting debts, breaking bones when necessary. Good at it. Better than good. But he's still a lieutenant in someone else's army, still waiting for permission to breathe too loud. Today, permission doesn't matter. Today, the king is dying, and the throne needs an heir. Bumpy lights another cigarette, hands shaking just enough to betray the war raging inside his chest. The flame from his gold lighter flickers across hollowed cheeks where flesh used to be. He doesn't waste time on small talk. Kings don't have that luxury when the clock is running out. You know Nicky Barnes? His voice sounds like gravel being crushed under expensive shoes. Frank nods once. Everyone knows Nicky Barnes. Loud, flashy, stupid. Barnes thinks being seen equals being respected. Fur coats in summer, pictures with movie stars, parties where reporters smile and take notes for federal files. Barnes is a dead man walking, Bumpy says, exhaling smoke that curls toward the ceiling like a departing soul. He just doesn't know it yet. Thinks fame is power. He's wrong. Fame is a federal indictment with your picture on the front page. Bumpy leans forward, and for a moment the dying man disappears, and the king returns. Eyes sharp, focused, burning with the intelligence that built empires when other men were robbing corner stores. The silent man lives. The loud man dies. Write that down in your head, Frank. Tattoo it on your brain. Because the moment you forget it, the moment you start believing your own legend, you're finished. He reaches into his desk drawer, past the gun and emergency cash, past phone numbers of judges who owe him favors. What he pulls out isn't a weapon. It's knowledge. A piece of brown butcher paper, folded twice, edges worn soft from years of handling. Bumpy unfolds it like a priest opening sacred text. The map is crude, almost childlike. 3 landmarks drawn in blue ink. 2 measurements that mean nothing to strangers. 1 X marking a spot that doesn't exist on any government document. North Jersey, Bumpy says, tapping the paper with a finger more bone than flesh. 40 acres I bought in '52 under a name that ain't mine. No buildings, no roads, no neighbors asking questions, just trees and dirt and silence. He slides the map across the table. Frank doesn't reach immediately. This isn't paper. This is philosophy. Never keep your money where the government can find it. Banks have cameras. Safety deposit boxes have keys that don't belong to you. But dirt? Bumpy's lips curl into something that might be a smile if death wasn't sitting so close. Dirt don't snitch. Concrete don't testify. When the time comes, and it will come, you bury it deep, you bury it alone, and you take that secret to your grave. Frank takes the map. Their fingers touch for a second. It feels like a coronation, like a curse being passed from one generation to the next. 3 months later, Bumpy Johnson dies eating fried chicken at Wells Restaurant. The funeral draws judges, cops, criminals, and politicians. Frank stands in the back, holding a secret that weighs more than any casket. He inherited more than Bumpy's operation. He inherited a code: make your money invisible. But building an empire means making enemies, and by 1975, Frank Lucas will have more money than he can spend and more people trying to kill him than he can count. By 1972, Harlem doesn't just belong to Frank Lucas. Harlem bows to him. The streets that once ran red with territorial wars now flow green with his money. This isn't a year in Frank's life. It's an avalanche. An empire built on the bodies of American soldiers and the genius of cutting out every middleman between Southeast Asia and Lenox Avenue. Blue magic floods every corner, every project, every desperate vein, searching for 98% pure relief. While the Italian mafia argues over territories and tribute, Frank has rewritten the rules of the game. He flies direct to the Golden Triangle, smuggles heroin inside the coffins of American soldiers coming home from Vietnam. The audacity alone should have gotten him killed. Instead, it made him untouchable. $20 million flows through his operation every month like water through broken pipes. Cash. Untraceable. Unstoppable. The Italians watch from their social clubs in Little Italy, wondering how a black man from North Carolina bypassed their entire supply chain. The answer cuts through their confusion like a blade. Frank went to the source. No mafia tax. No tribute to families that never earned his respect. Just pure business with suppliers who care about the color of American money, not the color of American skin. But here's what separates Frank Lucas from every other drug kingpin who burned bright and died young in federal cages. He remembers Bumpy's lesson carved into his brain like scripture. While Nicky Barnes buys Benzes and throws parties that make the society pages, Frank drives a beat-up Chevy with rust eating the doors. While other dealers wear their wealth like neon signs, Frank eats dinner at home with Julie, watches television, goes to bed at 10. He wears suits from discount racks, shoes that squeak on marble floors, a watch you could pawn for lunch money. To the world, Frank Lucas looks like a middle manager who sells insurance, not the biggest heroin distributor in American history. The silent man lives. The loud man dies. Every month, surgically, quietly, Frank skims $2 million off the top, 10% of an empire that generates more cash than some small countries see in a year. Nobody notices because nobody's looking for what they can't imagine. Julie thinks they're comfortable but not rich. His brothers see mountains of green on counting tables and assume that's all there is. Even his accountant, a nervous man who keeps 2 sets of books and sweats through expensive shirts, doesn't ask questions about the missing millions. Because Frank has a problem that legitimate businessmen dream of and criminals die from, where do you hide $50 million in cash? The mathematics are brutal. We're not talking about a briefcase full of hundreds tucked under a mattress. We're talking tonnage. $1 million in 20s weighs 50 pounds. Frank Lucas is moving 1,000 pounds of paper money every month. Money that smells like sweat and cocaine residue and broken dreams. Money that rots if it gets wet, burns if it gets hot, attracts rats and federal agents with equal enthusiasm. You can't put $50 million in a bank. Banks have cameras, records, federal regulators who ask uncomfortable questions about deposits that don't match tax returns. You can't bury it in your backyard because backyards have neighbors with curious eyes and loose tongues. Frank needs a vault that doesn't exist on any government map. The operation runs like a military exercise. New moon nights only, when darkness is absolute and satellites can't see through cloud cover. The money gets prepped in a warehouse outside Newark that officially processes frozen vegetables. This isn't just stuffing duffel bags. This is industrial preservation designed to outlast nuclear winter. Frank's country boys handle the logistics. Family from North Carolina who grew up poor, stayed loyal, understand that silence is survival and questions are suicide. They wash each bill in industrial sinks to remove street grime and drug residue. Heat lamps dry the money until it's crisp as autumn leaves. Then comes the sealing, vacuum-packed in heavy plastic wrapped in duct tape, stuffed inside military-grade waterproof steel drums purchased from a corrupt quartermaster at Fort Dix who thinks he's selling containers for moonshine. The convoy moves at 2 a.m, 3 trucks cutting through Jersey darkness like ghosts. 1 decoy loaded with actual vegetables up front. 2 following with treasure that could buy small nations. They take back roads that don't appear on maps, cut through industrial wastelands where the only witnesses are security cameras that stopped working years ago. Destination: Bumpy's Ghostland in the Pine Barrens. 40 acres of nothing under a name that never existed. No houses within 3 miles. No power lines crossing the property. No roads leading anywhere important. Just trees that have watched centuries pass without judgment and dirt that keeps secrets better than any federal vault. The forest swallows the trucks like they were never there. Frank steps out first, breathing air that smells like pine needles and ancient secrets. He didn't just pick random coordinates. He built a code into the landscape itself using landmarks only he can read. A lightning-struck oak, twisted like a broken arm, split down the middle by God's own violence. A rock formation shaped like a clenched fist, punching toward heaven. A creek that runs north-south, defying the natural flow of water and gravity in the region. 27 feet deep. That's the rule carved in stone and paranoia. Most utility lines run 6 feet down. Graves are 6 feet down. Frank goes 4 times deeper, reaching geology that hasn't seen sunlight since the Ice Age. The shovels bite earth until they hit clay so old it remembers when this was ocean floor. The drums go down like bodies in a mass grave. Steel against ancient mud, $50 million disappearing into New Jersey soil that will never testify, never wear a wire, never break under federal pressure. Dirt gets scattered. Leaves get kicked around. By dawn, it looks like nothing ever happened except wind and weather. But paranoia is the tuition you pay for wearing an invisible crown. Every trip to Jersey feels like Russian roulette with federal bullets. Frank starts seeing surveillance everywhere. Cars that follow too long before peeling away at convenient exits. Faces that appear twice in different neighborhoods, once coincidence, twice conspiracy. Helicopters that circle overhead just a little too long. Phone calls that click before anyone speaks. Sleep becomes a luxury he can't afford. Trust becomes a weapon pointed at his own head. The brutal mathematics catch up like a debt collector with a federal badge. You can't bury $50 million alone. One man digging holes that deep draws attention. One man carrying 300-pound steel drums looks suspicious to state troopers looking to fill quotas. One man driving back roads at midnight is a target painted in neon. Frank stares at the mound of fresh dirt in the moonlight, calculating the impossible equation. Bumpy said bury it alone. But Bumpy never had $50 million. Bumpy never faced the physical reality of moving tonnage through hostile territory while federal eyes watched from every shadow. So Frank makes the most dangerous decision of his career. Standing in that Jersey forest with dirt under his fingernails and empire weight on his shoulders, he chooses 3 men. Not random soldiers. Blood. Men who owe him the air in their lungs and the ground under their feet. Red, the enforcer, muscle-wrapped in silence. A man who'd rather chew glass than speak to federal agents. Earl, his quiet cousin who handles numbers and never drinks. The type who remembers every detail and never repeats one. Junebug, the driver, laughing and fearless, the kind who'd crash through roadblocks before tapping the brakes. Frank looks each of them in the eye under that black New Jersey sky. The moment feels like a baptism. It feels like signing death warrants in invisible ink. You see this, he says, nodding toward the buried fortune. You don't ever speak on it. Not to your woman. Not to your mama. Not to God himself. This isn't money. This is the throne. You understand the cost of touching a king's throne. They nod. Words of loyalty spill easy in the dark when $50 million sleeps in the dirt beneath your feet. But loyalty and fear live in different neighborhoods, and kings who trust forget the oldest rule carved into every empire that ever fell: betrayal always comes from inside the castle walls. Because one of those 3 men, standing there in the Pine Barrens with dirt on their hands and secrets in their hearts, will break the sacred code of silence. June 5, 1977. The New York Times Magazine hits newsstands like a death certificate printed in full color. Nicky Barnes stares from the cover wearing a smile that costs $50,000 and a suit that screams federal indictment. Gold chains catch studio lights like a disco ball made of evidence. The headline crowns him for every prosecutor in America to see, Mr. Untouchable. Frank Lucas picks up the magazine in a Harlem diner that smells like burnt coffee and broken dreams. He doesn't need to read the article. The cover tells him everything. Barnes just handed the federal government a personal invitation to destroy him. Gift wrapped in glossy paper and tied with a bow made of pure stupidity. The magazine lands in the trash like a body waiting to be buried. Nicky Barnes is the anti-Frank Lucas in every way that matters for survival. Where Frank drives rust buckets through Harlem like a ghost, Barnes collects luxury cars like trophies. Where Frank wears JCPenney suits that make him invisible, Barnes drapes himself in mink coats during summer heat. Where Frank eats dinner at home and sleeps 8 hours, Barnes throws parties that make society pages, invites reporters to document his lifestyle, poses for photographs that become prosecution exhibits. The binary opposition is biblical in its perfection, the silent man versus the loud man. The invisible king versus the peacock who thinks feathers equal power. Barnes represents everything Bumpy Johnson warned against in that smoke-filled Lenox Avenue apartment. Fame doesn't equal respect. Fame equals a target painted on your back in federal case red. 2 weeks after the magazine cover, they meet at Red Rooster on Lenox Avenue. Not by accident, Barnes requests it, wants to be seen breaking bread with Frank Lucas, wants the street to witness two kings at the same table. Frank accepts because refusing raises questions he doesn't need federal agents asking. Barnes arrives 40 minutes late in a fur coat despite July heat cooking Harlem concrete. Gold chains hang heavy enough to anchor ships. Diamond rings catch afternoon light, streaming through windows like warnings nobody heeds. He moves through the restaurant expecting applause, getting stares instead. Frank sits in the back booth wearing discount threads and a Timex watch. The contrast looks like a joke. It's actually a philosophy carved in survival instinct. Barnes slides into the seat, grinning like he just won a prize Frank didn't know they were competing for. Frank Lucas. The Ghost of Harlem. Man, you need to live a little. What's the point of being king if nobody sees the throne? Frank sips coffee that tastes like burnt ambition. His response comes quiet, cold, final as a coffin nail being hammered home. Kings live. Clowns get remembered in paperwork. Barnes laughs because he thinks it's wit. It's prophecy. While Barnes invites federal heat like a man begging for handcuffs, Frank perfects the machinery of invisibility. The ritual continues with religious precision every month. Cash counted 3 times by different hands. Bills wrapped in plastic thick enough to survive nuclear winter. Steel drums sealed with industrial adhesive welded shut by men who never ask what's inside. Coordinates memorized, cross-referenced against geological surveys, ensuring no future highways or shopping centers threaten his vaults. Frank isn't hiding money for next week. He's hiding it for the next century. Detective Richie Roberts enters the story like a bloodhound with a law degree and a grudge against corruption. He builds cases methodically, following money trails through banks and wire transfers, tracking offshore accounts and safety deposit boxes. Roberts searches for modern criminal infrastructure because that's what modern criminals use. But Frank Lucas learned from Depression-era wisdom. Roberts hunts digital ghosts while Frank's fortune sleeps in analog dirt that never learned to testify. The federal net tightens anyway because Barnes can't stop talking. The Mr. Untouchable cover enrages President Carter, who orders the Justice Department to take Barnes down at any cost. Each magazine interview becomes another thread Roberts can pull, another connection to map, another domino waiting to fall. October 1974. Rain hammers New Jersey like God trying to wash away sins that won't dissolve. Frank stands in the Pine Barrens with a shovel in his hands and a choice carved from paranoia and pride. Dig up $50 million and run, or trust the dirt to keep secrets better than any offshore bank. Frank grips the shovel handle until knuckles turn white. Rain soaks through his cheap coat, chilling him to bone. To run is to admit fear. To run is to become Barnes, panicked, desperate, loud. Frank drops the shovel. Walks away. The money stays buried. The empire stays invisible. Barnes makes the opposite choice when walls close in. Facing life without parole, the peacock loses his feathers. He talks. Names spill like water from a broken dam. Suppliers, distributors, corrupt cops, street soldiers. The dominoes fall so fast the sound is deafening. Everyone except Frank's burial crew. Because Barnes doesn't know about steel drums sleeping in Jersey soil, that secret belongs to Frank and three men who understand some silences are worth dying for. January 1975. The raid on Frank's Teaneck home is greenlit. Federal agents, SWAT teams, helicopters circling like mechanical vultures. The money is in the ground, 27 feet deep in dirt that never snitched. The map is in Frank's head, coordinates that will never appear in federal files. Time runs out like sand through fingers that built empires and buried fortunes. The silent man lived long enough to watch the loud man fall. Now Frank faces his own reckoning with a government that finally noticed the ghost of Harlem. January 28, 1975. The world explodes at exactly 6 a.m. Not 6:05, not 5:58. 6 o'clock precisely, because federal raids run on government time and government time doesn't negotiate. The first sound cuts through Teaneck morning silence like a chainsaw through silk. Helicopter blades chewing suburban sky into mechanical thunder. Then boots on frost-covered grass. Then the countdown that every drug kingpin hears in nightmares. 3, 2, 1. The battering ram hits Frank Lucas's front door like divine judgment wrapped in steel. Oak wood explodes inward, splinters flying like shrapnel from a domestic bomb. SWAT teams pour through the opening dressed for war, rifles drawn, voices layered and overlapping in tactical symphony. Flashlights cut through dawn darkness. Julie screams questions nobody bothers answering. The dog barks once, then goes silent, understanding predator hierarchy better than most humans. Frank stands in his hallway wearing a bathrobe that cost less than the tactical gear surrounding him. Hands raised, face calm. He's been expecting this moment since the first brick of blue magic hit Harlem pavement. Kings don't retire. They get caught or they get killed. Sometimes both. They tear his house apart with the enthusiasm of archaeologists hunting buried pharaohs. Walls sledgehammered. Floorboards pried up with crowbars. Furniture gutted like fish on a dock. They're searching for the legendary millions that built the Blue Magic Empire. The fortune that federal accountants know exists, but can't find in any ledger that matters. What they discover is $584,000 hidden in a ceiling tile above the master bedroom. The media will call it his life savings. Frank almost laughs reading headlines from his holding cell. Life savings? That's walking around money. Lunch money for an operation moving $1 million a day before most people finish their morning coffee. The real fortune sleeps 27 feet deep in Jersey dirt, wrapped in steel and silence, guarded by trees that never learned to testify. The interrogation room smells like industrial disinfectant trying to hide decades of fear sweat and broken confessions. Detective Richie Roberts sits across the metal table with files stacked like paper tombstones. 70 years in federal prison. That's the opening bid. Life without parole for a man who built a $250 million empire on the bodies of American soldiers and the genius of cutting out every middleman between Southeast Asia and American veins. Frank does the mathematics of survival in his head while lawyers argue over years and cooperation levels. 70 years is a threat. 15 years is a business expense. The cost of protecting $50 million buried in coordinates that exist nowhere except behind his eyes. He gives them the Asian connection. Business, not personal. The war is ending anyway, that pipeline was closing. He gives them the corrupt cops who sold badges for heroin money. Justice, not revenge. Those men betrayed their oaths for envelopes stuffed with hundreds. But he never mentions New Jersey. Never whispers about steel drums sleeping in Pine Barrens soil. Never speaks the coordinates memorized like nuclear launch codes. 15 years in a federal cage is the tax he pays to protect a buried throne. It's the best investment he'll ever make. The burial crew starts dying in ways that look accidental until you connect dots with blood. Earl, his quiet cousin who handled numbers and never drank, gets stabbed 17 times in a prison shower. The official report calls it gang violence over gambling debts. Frank reads it and knows better. 17 wounds isn't rage. It's interrogation. Someone wanted Earl quiet permanently because dead men don't draw treasure maps for federal immunity deals. June Bug, the laughing driver who'd crashed through roadblocks before tapping brakes, disappears like smoke in strong wind. His car turns up in Newark, keys in the ignition, wallet on the seat with $43 untouched. No body, no witnesses, no leads except cold case files. The message carved in absence. Talk and vanish. That leaves Red. The enforcer. The muscle wrapped in paranoia and survival instinct. Red doesn't wait for his turn in the death rotation. He goes ghost. Moves to Florida under a name that never existed. Changes his face with a beard and 40 pounds of weight. Never touches the buried money. Never talks about Frank Lucas. Never looks back at the empire they built from ambition and coffins full of heroin. Red understands something the others didn't before knives found them. Frank Lucas didn't bury $50 million as insurance. He buried it as a test. The only way to pass is silence. Permanent, absolute, deadly silence. Frank serves 15 years like a monk in a monastery made of concrete and razor wire. Released in 1991, he walks out broke on paper, but rich in secrets worth more than any bank balance. He drives to New Jersey on a Tuesday when surveillance is unlikely, searching for landmarks memorized 2 decades ago. But something's wrong. Development has crept closer like cancer through healthy tissue. Where perfect isolation once protected his vault, surveyor stakes now mark future subdivisions. Power lines cut through wilderness that used to be pure silence. The perfect hiding spot isn't perfect anymore. The invisible empire faces its greatest threat. Progress. May 30th, 2019. A Thursday that feels like a period at the end of a very long, very bloody sentence. Frank Lucas dies at 88 in a Cedar Grove rehab center, 3 miles from where his empire sleeps in Jersey dirt. Heart failure, the death certificate reads, like his heart was the only organ that failed in a life built on calculated risks and buried fortunes. The king of Harlem takes his last breath surrounded by beeping machines instead of bodyguards, Family who know the legend but not the coordinates. His eyes close on a world that never found his treasure. His lips seal on secrets that could buy small nations. The funeral is small, quiet, exactly how Frank orchestrated it decades ago in instructions nobody knew existed. No media circus, no federal agents lurking in back pews, just family, a few old associates who survived the empire's collapse, and a Baptist preacher who never knew the deceased moved more heroin than some countries produced. They lower Frank Lucas into ground that's legal, documented, mapped on official charts. The irony cuts deep. The man who trusted dirt more than banks gets buried in a cemetery with his real name carved in stone. 3 weeks pass, long enough for grief to soften into greed. The law office on Broad Street hasn't changed decor since 1987. Wood paneling darker than old blood, leather chairs cracking at the seams like broken promises. Feldman, Frank's nervous attorney who handled legitimate business and asked no questions about illegitimate fortunes, calls the family meeting with hands that shake just enough to betray what's inside isn't standard estate distribution. He opens the sealed envelope, past the will dividing legal assets nobody cares about, past insurance policies for houses sold decades ago. What emerges doesn't belong in any legitimate document: a diner napkin, faded, creased from years, folded inside an envelope, waiting for Frank Lucas to stop breathing. Hand drawn in blue ink, bleeding at the edges like wounds that never healed. 3 landmarks sketched with childlike precision: the old stone church with a crude steeple, the iron bridge rendered as parallel lines crossing wavy water, the crooked oak drawn as a tree bent sideways like arthritis made of wood. 2 measurements that make no sense to strangers, 14 paces north from the fist. 27 deep, where the creek bends twice. 1 X marking a spot that could be anywhere in 40 acres of wilderness, growing wild since 1952. Then Feldman plays the video. Frank's face fills the screen. Older than God, thinner than memory, eyes still sharp as the day he buried his first million. His voice sounds like gravel crushed under expensive shoes. If you're watching this, I'm dead. If you're looking at that map, you're greedy. Good. Greed, I understand. The money's real, the location's real. But landmarks die like men. The church got demolished in '87 for a parking lot nobody uses. The bridge got replaced in '93 with concrete that has no memory. The oak? That's your test. Development creeps closer every year. What was perfect in 1972 ain't perfect in 2019. Figure it out. The video ends. The treasure hunt begins. They hire investigators who specialize in cold cases and colder trails. Historians who know New Jersey geography like surgeons know anatomy. Treasure hunters with ground-penetrating radar sensitive enough to find Civil War coins. Satellite images get analyzed pixel by pixel. Prison letters get examined for coded references nobody noticed 40 years ago. Surviving associates get interviewed in nursing homes where memory comes and goes like tide. Nothing. The map is designed for someone who was there. Someone who thinks like Frank Lucas. Someone who remembers landmarks that exist only in memory and paranoia. Red, the last surviving member of the burial crew, the enforcer who went ghost in 1981 and never resurfaced. Finding the money means finding him first. But Red learned from Frank's example carved in blood in federal cases: the silent man lives. 38 years of silence. No social media, no tax returns under his real name, no forwarding address, just rumors about a man who knew where $50 million sleeps and chose poverty over betrayal. The philosophical conclusion crystallizes like ice on winter lakes. Frank's greatest con wasn't the heroin empire that flooded Harlem. It wasn't federal cooperation that reduced his sentence. It was convincing the world that somewhere in New Jersey, $50 million waits for the right person to claim it. Maybe the money exists, steel drums rusting in soil that kept secrets for 7 decades. Maybe it's mythology, a legend Frank created to torment the greedy from beyond the grave. Maybe his final joke is watching people dig holes in Jersey mud, chasing coordinates that shift with every retelling, pursuing fortunes that exist only in the space between truth and legend. The real treasure isn't buried in Pine Barrens. It's the lesson Bumpy Johnson taught in that smoke-filled apartment in 1968. Some secrets are worth more than the fortunes they protect. Silence is the ultimate currency. Invisibility is the greatest power. Frank Lucas died broke on paper, rich in mythology, legendary in silence. The shovels keep digging. The treasure hunters keep searching. The coordinates keep shifting like sand in strong wind. And somewhere in New Jersey, the dirt keeps its secrets the way Frank Lucas kept his. Absolutely. Permanently. Perfectly. Was Frank Lucas a king who buried his throne, or a magician who made $50 million disappear forever? The answer sleeps 27 feet deep in soil that will never testify. And maybe that's exactly how the King of Harlem wanted it. Not found, not stolen, not spent, just there, waiting, testing, proving that the greatest fortune isn't money you can spend. It's secrets you take to the grave while the world digs holes looking for ghosts.